Shashi Tharoor on what the Congress and the opposition's point of view is. The economy remains in tatters and international attention is now escalating on how India is treating its minorities. Joining me now is Member of Parliament Dr. Shashi Tharoor on what the Congress and the opposition's point of view is and what their thrust might be going forward on what looks like a time of great conflict. Dr. Tharoor, thank you for speaking with us. The Human Rights Commission, the UN Human Rights Commission has actually filed an intervention in the Supreme Court. They're going against the CAA. You've been a part of that organization. Has there ever been a precedent to something like this?
Now, I've not been a part of that organization. I was a part of
the
UNHCR,
UN generally,
which is
yes.
the High Commissioner for Refugees, as well as the main UN, but the High Commissioner for Human Rights has certainly not intervened, as far as I'm aware, in any Indian matter before. And I think it's because we have had a pretty exemplary record on human rights. Not that violations haven't occurred, but they've occurred despite the system and with the system against those violations. The idea of a violation being committed by the state itself is truly shocking. And the fact that the government has repeatedly denied my own recommendations, my private members' bills, to pass an asylum law that would bring our refugee practices up to speed with the rest of the democratic world. They've repeatedly rejected this. I've seen home ministers, ministers of state for home secretaries. They are simply not interested. This is the problem with this government, that by coming up instead with a blatantly discriminatory law that singles out members of certain faiths, they have actually violated the basic principles of international humanitarian law. So it's not surprising that the UN thought this was wrong. It is still a bit surprising that they chose to file a case. That's a very extreme step.
The government has responded though already, saying that they have no locus standi. Then again, this goes against the international covenants, is the stand of the UN Human Rights Commission. What would the Congress's stand be in this situation? Do you support this?
Well, I'm not a Congress spokesman, Tari. I can only speak for myself as an individual. I certainly feel that this is not only a betrayal of international covenants and principles which are widely known and widely universally accepted, but it's also a betrayal of our own humanitarian traditions. We have thousands of years of recorded history of giving refuge to people seeking asylum here without once inquiring about their religion. We didn't ask about the religion of the Tibetans, of the Bangladeshis in 1971, of the Tamils. We've had people of every faith amongst the Tamil refugee population, amongst the Bangladeshi refugee population, and that's the way it should be. Asylum is an act that is given by a humanitarian government to save people who fear being persecuted. And that is a right thing, but it should not be qualified by saying, if you fear persecution and you happen to be Muslim, then you don't qualify. Either you fear persecution or you don't. And the simplest thing that most democracies do is to have a refugee status determination procedure. You have an asylum law that specifies the grounds, usually the same grounds that the international covenants respect, which is persecution on the grounds of your race, your religion, your nationality, your gender, your membership of a particular social group, or your political opinion. I mean, you can be a Muslim in Bangladesh or Pakistan or Afghanistan and have a political opinion that forces you into exile. Why would you be ineligible for protection in India under the CAA? So in many ways, the bias of this government is at odds with both international law and with India's domestic traditions, historical traditions, and recent practice in the last few decades.
Given the fact that this is an unprecedented act, what do you think might be the international ramifications of this for India?
Look, the international ramifications of India's conduct in the last 6-8 months have already been readily apparent throughout the world. That is that our standing has never been lower. The country is frankly spoken about in very negative terms wherever you go. Even countries that are very close to us, are very friendly to us. I have very senior government officials saying to me privately, we want to be your friends. Tell your government not to make it so difficult for us to be your friends. And this is something I hear in Islamic countries in particular. It's one of these situations where literally you pick up any foreign newspaper that has an article or an editorial on India in the last 6 months, and it's going to be a negative article or editorial. There's nothing positive anymore about our image in the world. So the UN case, as I said, it is an unusual and somewhat extreme step, but it is merely symptomatic of the depths to which India's stock has fallen in the eyes of the world, and that's very sad.
Iran and Bangladesh have already responded, Dr. Tharoor. The Iranian ambassador was apparently summoned, and given the Indian government's point of view, you would expect more global governments to join in?
You know, I know that there are many governments that have called in our ambassador in those countries and conveyed their concerns, much more than has been reported here. I know because I have friends in the diplomatic community who've told me that we had to call in your ambassador in such country, and we've told him there's disquiet in our country about these things. And these are, in many cases, countries which have excellent relations with us for a long time. So I want to say that there is no doubt in my mind that the government is either unaware of or oblivious to the very serious international ramifications of their narrow-minded domestic political choices. Polarization between Hindus and Muslims might work as a political tactic for the BJP. It has done immense damage to the standing of India as a country in the eyes of the rest of the world. And that is precisely, I fear, the reason behind all of this. I don't know whether the UN has a locus standi in our Supreme Court. It's entirely possible the Supreme Court could refuse to entertain their petition. But the fact that they chose to do it is a very serious issue. And you know, I'm an opposition MP, but I'm also an Indian. I don't want to feel ashamed of my country abroad. I want to go around saying that even if other people are running the country in power, in government, that it is my country and that we hold our head high in the world. We are not able to hold our head high anymore. We are seen in the most contemptuous terms by many, many countries and by right-thinking people in any liberal democracy. And that's something that is truly chastening for any proud Indian as I am.
How would you define the 4-day violence that occurred in Delhi last week, where we've seen
we can pick lots of words. Reprehensible comes to mind. It's shame-making. It's obviously must be condemned. I don't understand who
would you go
gains
so
from
far
this
as
kind
to
of...
call it a pogrom, sir? I think that's my question.
Well, that's the word I was not trying to use, because it serves a similar purpose as the old Jewish pogroms. You first kill a few people, you strike terror into the hearts of the rest, and you try and drive them away. It's a terrible thing. I would argue that in a country our size and with the numbers involved, even killing 56 people is not going to have the effect that the classic old pogroms had. But it doesn't matter what word we use. It was wrong, whether one person was killed or 56. The truth is, it was deeply, deeply wrong. And it's very difficult to understand what people thought they were gaining from this, other than responding like Pavlov's dog to the stimulus of hate speech and inflammatory rhetoric that had been stirred up by irresponsible politicians in high positions of power.
What do you think the economic ramifications of this act might be?
Well, the economic ramifications are fortunately not yet there, but they're not at all impossible. I know, for example, during an earlier period of violence, investors whom I knew were saying, why should we put our money in a country where these things happen? Today, let's get one thing very right. Investors have multiple options to where to put their money, foreign investors. And they certainly value social peace. They value a pleasant, conducive atmosphere within which their investment can grow. If they fear that India is now being convulsed in social tension with the imminent prospect of retaliatory religious violence from the other side, as it were, if that's what people start fearing, they won't put their money in our country. So it's fortunately hasn't happened so far. People are still absorbing what's been going on in our country in the last few months. But unless the government very rapidly takes hold of the situation and reverses the disastrous course on which it has embarked in the last few months, I think we will certainly see that financial consequence as the next step.
The events, in fact, unfolded even as the President of the US was visiting India, Dr. Tharoor. Would you say that India's chances at striking some kind of trade deal in which its own interests might be protected are now at stake?
So far, no, because the US, and frankly, has a president who has also not been terribly kind to Muslims coming into his country, and so perhaps there were affinities there that we're not fully aware of, though obviously the US as a government has expressed concern publicly and privately. I would say that, that's at this stage, no, I don't want to be excessively alarmist, Mitali, but I would not rule out the possibility that this kind of behavior would have repercussions in other areas of our international engagement, including trade and economic policies. I think at the moment the obstacles to our trade discussions with the Americans, with the EU and with others are essentially related to trade issues and nothing else. There are some, shall we say, Indian attitudes towards trade which are still very protectionist and bureaucratically driven, and which are out of touch with the currents in the global economy over the last generation, which has brought so much prosperity to the world. And that is still, I think, a bigger problem in striking a deal, because we are seen by many, particularly free trade-oriented countries, as being excessively restrictive and protectionist, and therefore they don't want to make concessions to us. It's always a give and take syndrome, and we are seen as not giving enough.
What is the opposition's stance or plan at this point, Dr. Tharoor, particularly with respect to how you plan to escalate this in Parliament? Because for now it's been upending itself in chaos each time, and it looks like
so
it's gotten pushed beyond holding.
There's no question that what we need to do is to actually force a discussion on the issue, hold the government to account. That's what Parliament is for. It's a forum for governmental accountability to the public of this nation. And we have said that the Prime Minister needs to take moral responsibility and say what he understands happened, why it happened, who caused it to happen, and what they will do about it. None of which has officially been shared by the government, even in a written statement, forget anything else. We have a Parliament in session. What is Parliament for if not to discuss the burning issues of the day? So the opposition has been determined to force the government to address the issue. And I must say that it's remarkable that 2 days of disruption and really deep unpleasantness inside the House has not been enough to provoke the government into coming and giving even a statement. I find this quite extraordinary. We've come a long way from the days when Congress Prime Ministers used to attend every day, used to speak when called upon to do so, used to respond to questions and charges. We now have a Prime Minister who makes fewer appearances in the Parliament of which he is a member than he does in foreign parliaments and stages when he goes around. This won't do. His principal accountability is to the people of India, and that's what we are demanding.
Since we have raised the idea of what and who should have been present, there is a question mark about why Rahul Gandhi was absent, Dr. Tharoor, especially during the time when the tumult was highest, not present at the candlelight vigil either. Are we to understand he is not president of the Congress party or does not choose to
Well, it's true that he's not president of the Congress party. So in all fairness, the Congress party office bearers, people in positions of responsibility, have largely been very, very present. And Rahul Gandhi himself, as a member in good standing, as it were, a former president, and as the MP, as an MP of the Congress, was very much there from yesterday onwards. So let's say that his own participation, if you're looking at it as a symbol of the Congress's determination, the Congress remains very strongly determined to do something serious and to do something absolutely committed to the foundational values and principles that this country stands for.
What might that be, sir? I think because that's where the question mark lies. I mean, you have talked about the moral philosophy of the Congress, but we haven't seen that on the ground, and we didn't through the violence in Delhi. There is a question mark about whether the Congress is even present and what it's really doing.
No, that's again not fair, because in Delhi, I know about very many Congress colleagues who have been actually to the areas during and immediately after violence, and who were themselves involved in trying to offer assistance. My own colleagues from the All India Professionals Congress, whom I asked to go there, included lawyers and health practitioners, and 5 or 6 of them were even physically manhandled by the local police, who pushed them around. In one case was beaten them with a stick. And we haven't made a song and dance about this because we feel it's not us that the issue is about. The issue is about the far bigger victims who have suffered even loss of life and more serious injury. But this is the kind of challenge we're facing. It's not easy. You can go and make a visit to look at the place. And even today, I know at 1:30 there was a delegation of Congress leaders going to northeastern Delhi to see the situation. But the fact is that ultimately these are matters that are in the hands of the government. And in particular in Delhi, the central government. Because whereas in other states they have a tendency to attribute responsibility for lynchings and other law and order violations to failures of the state government, here they have no such excuse. This is their responsibility. The Delhi police reports directly to the Home Ministry. And therefore I think that they really do need to come and give us an explanation. And they need to say what they did, why they didn't do anything more, and why they couldn't do anything more if they couldn't, and what exactly they're doing to bring the offenders to book. I mean, we are seeing a deliberate stalling of attempts to pursue justice. A judge demands FIRs for those senior people who made hate speeches. He is transferred at the midnight hour. A petition is filed asking for FIRs. Many weeks are given for that purpose. A debate is being sought in Parliament. The government wants a date that is 9 days later than the resumption of Parliament. I mean, this is a complete stalling, a complete unwillingness to face up to the government's own responsibility. And that's something that deeply, deeply worries us.
The state government has been pushing for an SIT to look into what happened. There's also the allegations that the Delhi police was actually complicit in this entire exercise.
Which is why an SIT may not solve the problem.
Would that be something you support?
Some of the people who are themselves compromised may be in the SIT. That's part of the challenge we have.
I want to swivel a little bit to the fabric of what happened in those 4 days as well, Dr. Tharoor, because as most facts indicate, it was a very young age group that was participating in this violence. Boys as young as 15, many of the dead are not even over 35. This ties in with the raging unemployment issue that the country is facing. How aggravated do you think it is, and how do you think it needs to be addressed?
Well, the unemployment issue is definitely a source of frustration. I don't think it leads people to kill. It leads people to look desperately for jobs, and it leads some to give up looking for jobs. But killing requires, frankly, hatred to be stoked up, which is what has been done by some. But as far as the unemployment situation is concerned, it's the worst we've seen in 46 years as a percentage, and the worst we've seen ever in terms of numbers. We are also looking at colossally dramatic, once you break down the figures, you're looking, for example, at the educated unemployed. The unemployment rate is at a record level of over 30%. And if you look at the breakdown of ages, those who are starting work, 20 to 24 graduates, 60% unemployment.
In urban India.
It is absolutely astonishing. We've never had numbers like this in the history of independent India. What does this mean? When 60%, that is 2/3 of your educated graduates, are unable to find a job, how can they come to the Prime Minister makes blithe speeches about go and fry pakoras? But the honest truth is that for people who feel that their education needs to be translated into something meaningful and remunerative in terms of a career, this is a deeply frustrating time. So that's the first and perhaps arguably the most important challenge facing the government, and they seem to be completely bereft of ideas. We had actually pledged to put a task force together, had we come to power last year, to work out on an urgent basis a job scheme. We actually had tasked some economists at reputable universities around the world to start working on papers for us on jobs. When the results came out, obviously that fizzled out because there was a perception we couldn't do very much. And because economic policy at the national level is what has an overwhelming impact, there's only limited things we can do in the states where we are in power. But we're going to try and improve the employment realities for people and the opportunities for people in the states which we are in power in.
The recent Lokniti CSTS data, though, Dr. Tharoor, shows that it is still deep alignment with the ruling party for pretty much the entire population on core issues such as the NRC, the CAA, Article 370. I want to understand better what the Congress's approach is at this point, where it seems so disconnected with the larger population. There has been some state level performance for sure, but at the national level, there seems like there is hardly any representation or connect.
Again, it's interesting that you call these the core issues. Are these really the core issues
It
facing
seems
the
like
nation?
that for the
The
population
core
that was
issues
sampled.
facing the nation for us are things like jobs, are things like employment, are things like agrarian distress, where 45 farmers are committing suicide on average every single day. That's the kind of core issue that the country is facing. 11,000 automobile workers laid off in the last month. Look at the reality facing the ordinary people of this country. Frankly, how many people are directly affected by 370 outside Kashmir or outside politics? How many are directly affected by CAA? Obviously, NRC would affect a large number of people, but the Prime Minister now seems to be backing off from it. Those are not, in many ways, the core issues. The government has made them the core issues. It's like in the midst of great economic failure, they won re-election in 2019 by talking about national security and Pulwama and Balakot and the 56-inch chest keeping the nation safe. So they have a tremendous capacity to deploy weapons of mass distraction from the core issues facing the nation. And if you call these the core issues, then I think, yes, you'll probably find, I mean, who's going to disagree with the need to keep the nation safe? Who's going to disagree with anything that's portrayed as being in the collective national interest? Whereas if you explain to people that what is happening is a betrayal of the nation, has damaged the nation's image around the world grossly, has caused great fear and anxiety within society, and could tomorrow lead to increased violence, who's going to be in favor of it? A lot depends on how it's presented. So I will say that I take this survey with a pinch of salt. I think the Congress Party has to do much more of a mass education campaign. Certainly we have been doing a lot of public speaking about these issues in Kerala and in my case elsewhere as well. The idea is to explain to people why we have taken the stand we have, and once we explain, there is usually a tremendous level of approval for the stand of the Congress Party on the CAA, NRC, NPR issue, because people can understand the dangers.
You yourself have indicated that part of the problem at the national level is the fact that there's a party president who's in absentia several times. It's not the first time you've raised this issue about the fact that fair and free elections are required in the Congress. But what is step two, sir? Where does this move from here?
Well, look, frankly, all I can do is suggest I'm not in any decision-making body of the organization. I mean, only the working committee can make this decision. And as of now, I don't even think they've met for a while yet, and certainly this has not been on their agenda. But as you know, the calls for this sort of revival steps are mounting. A couple of my party colleagues have written a piece in the Times of India today saying something similar. And for everyone who's willing to speak out publicly, there are a dozen who are muttering privately exactly the same things, but who for various reasons don't feel it appropriate or don't feel it's their place to say it publicly. So I think the general perception is we need to find some energy into the party, energize the party workers, but also galvanize the voters around us. We know that the national elections are 4.5 years away, but we can't sit on our hands for 4.5 years. There's a great deal we need to do. Plus, there are the ongoing referenda on the government and state elections every few months somewhere or the other. And for those two, we need to be prepared with a strong, coherent message, test our organizational abilities and our organizational strategies, strengthen our grassroots organizations. I've always believed that the only logic for politics in a democracy, beyond the accountability aspect that I've already mentioned, is to serve the public between elections as well, and not only at the time of elections. So again, I see this a lot in my party in Kerala. And maybe I'm going on too much, but that's my first-hand experience of party politics, is when something goes wrong in a mohalla, in a slum. The first person who called me is a Congress worker saying, this particular incident happened, can you intervene with the police commissioner or with the government or whatever else? And this is going on with no election in sight. It's a daily affair because the workers are present amongst the people, and the people come to them with their problems, and then these problems are addressed.
One final question, which is that your fellow Congress colleague Manish Tiwari has indicated that there is no difference of opinion at all within the Congress. There is unanimous opinion that Sonia Gandhi is the person to lead the Congress. Would you concur with that?
I think there's unanimous opinion that she's the right person right now as an interim solution. But I think no one seriously believes that this can be an indefinite solution, given that it was only less than 2 years ago that she relinquished the post in the first place, saying that it was now time to move on. So now you've dragged back somebody who had earned a well-deserved rest, and she's working very hard. Don't get me wrong, she's working very, very hard indeed. But clearly it's unfair to her and unfair to the voters to move back in this way. I mean, this back to the future stuff may work in Hollywood, it doesn't work in domestic politics beyond a point. So she herself, when the appointment was made, took it on as an interim appointment. And the one thing that interim means is it's not permanent, it's not going to be durable. So one needs, beyond that, a solution. As far as Manisha's other idea of an ideological discussion is concerned, I would welcome that. I've always had no doubt in my mind what were the ideas and values and principles of the Congress Party that attracted me to the party. But I assume that those are broadly shared principles of what Indians call secularism, but really the world would understand as pluralism, a celebration of India's diversity, economic liberalization coupled with social justice, respect for the needs of the poor and the marginalized, inclusion of those who have been excluded, whether from education, whether from jobs, whether from government opportunities, whether on the basis of gender, whether on the basis of caste, whether on the basis of religion. An inclusive India has been the goal of the Congress Party, an equitable India, an India that is more just, an India at the same time that is effective on the world stage, respected around the world, and where Indians can hold their heads high. This sort of India I'm very proud to work for in the Congress Party, and I believe that if we communicate effectively to the public that this is what we're about, honestly I don't see why we would not win back their affection and trust again. Surely no one wants to be ruled by divisive people, spreading hatred and creating this kind of violence in our society. That's not what most people would like to see when they hold up a mirror to their own country.
So you will be holding the Congress Party accountable to holding elections soon?
Well, look, I mean, the Americans have this lovely expression, that's above my pay grade. And the truth is that I have no, unfortunately, I really have no responsibility to fulfill what I've suggested. All I can do is suggest it. Others have to make the decision. I hope they do so. And if for good reasons or bad reasons they don't do so, they need to find some other way of reviving interest in the party. Because right now I go out a lot in the public space. I'm making dozens of public appearances with audiences ranging from executives to university students. And what I see, frankly, and what I hear back is not very encouraging. We need to give them a different face of the Congress.
Thank you very much for your time.